a podcast of the development of technology from 1960 to 1990 by Kelley, Education7100, EDS in Educational Technology, Walden University, August 11th, 2013. I have chosen to do a podcast on the decades of the 60s, 70s, and 80s due to the large turnover in the presidential office and the beginning of technology. Regardless of the mess that our country experienced, technology advances still were created. The computer age had a breakthrough that allows electronics to be small and also keep memory through the random access memory. This will allow electronics to be accessible by all consumers later. The 60s. Freedom rallies, sit-ins, riots. Leaders are created in the 60s. 1960s. The 60s brought more war. During Eisenhower's presidency, the Vietnam War escalated. 1961, John F. Kennedy is inaugurated as the 35th President of the United States of America. The launch of Sputnik in 1957 causes President Kennedy to launch the Apollo project to put man on the moon. This challenges not only NASA, but the whole country to think big, dream big, and then to act on those dreams. The goal of putting man on the moon before the decade is over, with the full support of the nation, along with full funding and funding for other technological advances. Kennedy didn't just fund many advanced projects, but he gave the American people a goal to be a better and to be number one and move forward. Even though Kennedy was dealing with foreign affairs issues, he also had to deal with issues with the civil rights movement on America's soil. The KKK broke out in response to the Freedom Rides, therefore pushing Kennedy into action due to the violence. September of 1962, Kennedy sent 500 marshals to keep law and order as James Meredith enrolled in an all-white college. In 1963, Kennedy sent the National Guard to make sure the college in Birmingham was upholding the law of desegregation. March 28, 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. delivers his "I Have a Dream" speech. Foreign conflict increased. Competition with the Soviets intensified, not only through the efforts of beating them through space, but also as our nation was threatened by the Soviets' missiles and views of communism. Crisis of the Cold War in 1961. Bay of Pigs was a secret mission that ended in disaster, and the United States never admitted involvement. Kennedy continues commitment to West Berlin, therefore Khrushchev builds the Berlin Wall. In 1962, United States is threatened as the Soviet Union places missiles in Cuba. Through negotiations, a deal was made between the United States and Soviet Union, which allowed everyone to sleep in peace once again. Americans mourn a great president. November 22, 1963, Kennedy is shot and killed in Dallas, Texas. As Lyndon B. Johnson takes over as president, America is left to mourn for the loss of this great president who is known for challenging ourselves and always looking for ways to make our nation better. Lyndon B. Johnson continues with Kennedy's vision. November 22, 1963, he became the 36th President of the United States after the assassination of Kennedy. 1964, the railroad crisis. Also in 1964, Vietnamese torpedo boats attacked U.S. Navy destroyers in the Gulf of Tonkin. 1964, the Civil Rights Law was finally signed and passed. Kennedy's challenge not only advanced the space program, but also advanced other forms of technology. In 1968, engineer Ted Hoff invented one chip that could do the work of all the chips that had been previously needed for electronics. The Intel 404 microprocessor allows devices today to be as small as they are in size. Also, in 1968, Robert Dinard invented RAM, Random Access Memory, one of the first forms of memory processing in a computer. Kennedy's challenge is America's hope. Individuals are pursuing their dreams and advancing their businesses by thinking outside of the box. Dominic Lamberti, an Italian immigrant and former coal miner, opened a coal and ice delivery business, later decided that he would advance his business by also offering groceries inside, and then as times changed, he offered gas outside. The first Casey's General Store. Everyone deserves freedom. Martin Luther King Jr. took Kennedy's famous quote to heart: "It's not what your country does, but what you do for your country." Martin Luther King Jr. stood up for what was right, and he fought for his rights along with others, and in return he made a huge impact in securing the freedom and rights of all men and women and ending segregation. The assassination of another great man with a vision. April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Even though King did not live to see his dream come true, because of his role in the civil rights movement, he had a major impact that made his dream possible and helped others live his dream. He helped change America. Kennedy's dream. America sees Kennedy's dream fulfilled on July 20th, 1969, as Neil Armstrong took the first step for mankind when he took man's first step on the moon. In 1969, Richard Nixon is inaugurated, the 37th President of the United States of America. As we have focused on individual rights, Herbert R. Cole begins a new thought in his book, The Open Classroom, promoting an open education, focusing on student-centered classrooms. Education in 1969 begins thinking about the rights and feelings of the individual student. 1970, Jean Piaget publishes The Science of Education on Discovery-Based Teaching. Decade of the Disco. The 70s, flower power, love bugs, share, drugs, sex, all part of the 70s. Even though politically our country was a mess, due to the 60s push on following dreams and pushing to make things better, the 70s reaped the technological advances and the work from the 60s. The decade started with the VCR in 1971. The 70s bring violence and anti-war efforts. Nixon must send National Guardsmen to Kent State University to halt the anti-war riots. 1970 was a very busy year for Nixon as he signs the reorganization of the post office, and then in 1971, wage price control bill and lowering the voting age from 21 to 18. Individual rights continue. The industrial age created lots of air pollution, but now as we are focusing on making our country better and creating a better environment for everyone, which creates the 1970 Clean Air Act, which emphasizes the importance of keeping the air clean. This political action created a need to figure out how to replace the factories. In 1972, Watergate scandal began hitting the public as 5 thieves were arrested while breaking into the Democrat National Headquarters. 1973, Roe v. Wade, the famous trial that makes it illegal for states to outlaw abortion. Corruption of the Vice President Spiro Agnew resigns as he is charged for something he did while he was governor in Maryland. Life as Americans knew it was forced to change. October 17, 1973, OPEC cut United States' supply of oil due to their support to Israel. Therefore, the limited amount of gas caused prices to increase 45%. Americans were fearful as everyone learned of our weakness. Due to the shortage and increase of oil, life that Americans had grown accustomed to was threatened. It became known that things needed to change, and Americans had to design new technologies that decreased the amount of oil needed. The United States was in the middle of an energy crisis. Creating cars that were lighter, less metal, and used less gas became important as gas prices rose. Gerald Ford in 1973 is nominated for vice president. Continues with civil rights as Nixon increases Social Security benefits. The Rehabilitation Act made it mandatory for all major companies to employ a certain percentage of disabled employees and forbade discrimination. 1974, the Supreme Court rules women should receive equal pay for performing equal work. Ford signs IRSA, which protects retired people. During Nixon's presidency, Nixon created EPA, Earth Day, Endangered Species Act, Clean Air Act, and Pesticide Act. Education, the weakest link, was deemed as how society was going to be judged. Society questioned science as the energy crisis was experienced. Were also invented. Viking 1 lands on Mars, and Jimmy Carter defeats Gerald Ford in the presidential election. 1976, Stephen Wozniak and Steve Jobs designed the first Apple computer. 1976, Microsoft also came about. 1977, Carter is inaugurated as the 39th president. Carter pardons Vietnam evaders. 1978, Carter creates the Taft-Hartley Act to end a strike of coal miners. Carter also grants full diplomatic status to the People's Republic of China. And also, the artificial heart is created. 1979, Carter approves development of the MX missile. Iranian students take 66 Americans hostage at American Embassy in Tehran. Home Depot was founded by Bernie Marcus, Arthur Blank, and Kenneth Langon of Atlanta, Georgia. They launched the Home Depot idea that took off, do-it-yourself home improvement. Men were coming home from the war and didn't have jobs, therefore they needed to keep busy and do jobs around the house. What better way? Home improvement at Home Depot. 1979, cell phones were invented. 80s bring consequences from the life of the 70s. The 70s is known for trying drugs and lots of sex. The action of the 70s bring consequences of new laws and new diseases. Due to the increase of sexual diseases, health programs are essential in schools. Schools also must teach the importance of staying away from drugs and the consequences of drugs. Madeline C. Hunter introduces mastery teaching, emphasizing direct instruction teaching model. The public becomes easily informed of what is happening in the country and globally as cable television becomes common in homes along with watching nightly news stations. Technology is booming. 1980, Chrysler bailout is signed. The Refugee Act helps immigrants resettle in the United States. 80s bring U.S. Olympic Committee votes to boycott Olympics in Moscow in support of President Carter. 1980 and 84, the U.S. boycotts Olympics due to their war on Afghanistan. 1980, Carter loses election to Ronald Reagan. 1981, Reagan, 40th president, is inaugurated. 81, Microsoft DOS and first IBM PC is invented. Iran releases 52 American hostages. Air traffic controllers go on strike, and Reagan ignores their actions. Assassination attempt, Reagan is shot by John Warnock Hinckley, Jr. 1982, unemployment hits a record high since the Great Depression, 10.8%. 83, Reagan signs the Social Security Reform Bill into law. U.S. forces invade and liberate Grenada. National Commission of Excellence in Education reported that the United States was a nation at risk. The report stated that we were behind on education. Jim Sinegal opened the first Costco store on September 15, 1983, which allowed small businesses to buy goods at discount prices. Later, they opened it to retail owners and then a membership-only basis. 1984, scientists identified the AIDS virus, all from all those parties in Grenada. 1984, Reagan wins re-election. Reagan's second term of office. 1986 is a busy year for Reagan. Chernobyl power station in the USSR explodes. The Space Shuttle Challenger explodes after takeoff. People begin thinking about animal rights. PetSmart is opened by Jim and Janice Daugherty in 1986. QVC, founded by Joseph Sigel, the first online retail store. Fuji introduced the first disposable camera. Apple Macintosh is invented. 1987, Black Monday stock market crash. The Dow Jones falls 508 points, 23%. 1988, George H.W. Bush is elected. 1988, the digital cell phone reached the market. George H.W. Bush, 41st president. 1989, bailout plan for troubled savings and loans banks. 1989, ban on importation of semi-automatic rifles. Oil spills in southeastern Alaska. Bush suspends the sale of weapons in China. Bush signs into law the Financial Institutions Reform. Recover of the Enforcement Act of 1989. 1989, also, the Berlin Wall falls, ending the communist rule in Eastern Europe. Bush signs anti-drug law expanding programs. The first online offered degree at University of Phoenix. The end of the 80s brings internet to the 90s, and the new idea of accessing the web and purchasing items through the internet is now brought to life thanks to the 80s. And the credit goes to the following resources: